Good evening, everyone, and welcome to FIRESafe Marin's webinar series. My name is Rich Shortall, the FIRESafe Marin Executive Coordinator. The FIRESafe Marin webinar series is created by the members of our educational committee, including representatives from fire agencies, environmental groups, UC Marin Master Gardeners, and other subject matter experts. This project is funded and supported by the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority. Before we begin tonight's presentation, I want to let you know that we have several interesting webinars coming up. In June, we will cover evacuation concerns for animals, both large and small. And in July, we will learn about the impact wildfires have had on the home insurance industry. And maybe more importantly, we'll find out what's being done about it. So tonight, we're going to discuss the environmental concerns related to creating fire-smart landscaping around our homes. Tonight, our speakers are Mike Swezy from the Marin Conservation League, Nate Clark, Biodiversity and Fuels Project Coordinator for the Marin County Open Space District, and Yvette Blount, Supervisor of the Novato Fire Department Wildfire Mitigation Specialist Program. We do encourage all of you to participate by providing questions in writing through that Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Questions that can't be addressed tonight will be answered on our website and available for later review. We do ask that you keep your questions related to the topic, please. Tonight's presentation will be recorded and available on the FIRESafe Marin YouTube channel that also includes many other interesting educational wildfire videos. After tonight's presentation, we'll have a roundtable discussion and an opportunity to ask additional questions of our panelists. So let's start by introducing Mike Swezy. He's going to tell us about the environmental group called Ecologically Sound Practices and some of their recommendations for transforming properties into fire-smart, water-wise, biodiverse, and climate-friendly landscapes. Mike, thank you.
Thanks, Rich. Really happy to be here to talk to you all, and thanks to FIRESafe Marin's, to you, Rich, and your staff for doing such great work. Happy to be a participant. So Rich has asked me to present to you the work of the Ecologically Sound Practices Partnership. So I'm going to do that. We have a big document that's going to hit the streets in about 2 days. So I'm going to give you the briefest summary of that. But let me get started here. But first, I wanted to give you a little background about ecologically sound practices. So what is the ESP partnership? Well, it came out of the Joint Powers Agreement for the MWPA when they were just forming before the tax measure that funded them. So you can read it there. It's all about delivering MWPA's work in an ecologically sound manner, and it recognizes that the fire crisis and the biodiversity issues we have are largely driven by climate change. And so the problem going to the next slide. Why is that? So after the JPA was signed by all the folks, we got 60 experts into a room. And here's the list of all of the representatives of all those people. So it's public agencies, fire folks, land managers, environmental groups, people concerned about managing green waste, because ultimately that's something we want to do to move that vegetation off of our properties. We did an effort to identify what were aspirations and concerns. So you can see it's very broad. And we're really focusing on not all of the work of MWPA, but mostly the vegetation management part of it. So briefly, we formed this partnership of all those experts and agency folks, and really it's a collaboration, and we're solution oriented. We picked 3 areas of interest, but the one that's current for us tonight is the work we did on defensible space. So we formed a committee, and that's the work that's probably touches the most lives and had the largest participation by all of the folks that are participating. Because it's all the homes in Marin, defensible space. So that group, that defensible space committee, formed three areas of focus because our intent was to take into account all of the work that FIRESafe Marin, Master Gardeners, Native Plant Society, folks that are generating information for homeowners to see what value we can add to their work and see if there are any gaps. So these are the three areas we focused on: fire-wise plant choices, maintenance, and wildlife issues. So as you know, you've probably heard this 100 times now. This wildfire issue that we're facing has a lot of roots. So it happens in the wildlands, but it also happens in our yards. We have invasive plants. Who's got broom in their yard? Who's got annual grasses? These are fire risk. We have sudden oak death. Our stately oak trees are often afflicted by sudden oak death. Many of us live in neighborhoods that were once well forested and have been logged. Fire suppression, we still want to see fire suppression in the community, but that fire suppression in the wildlands has been an issue. We have climate change with all of its impacts, and now we have this long-term drought, which is especially acute this year. And the other part of this picture is Marin's hills were mostly grasslands, were near the towns, and almost all of these historic photos that we can see, these grasslands now have houses on them. They have a forest canopy of combination of native trees and planted trees, and then there's gardens underneath them. And unfortunately, most of those landscapes are unmanaged. So the goal for ESP was, for the Defensible Space Group, was how can we transform our properties into fire safe, water-wise, biodiverse, and climate-friendly landscapes? And underlying that is you can have it all. I don't have pictures for that because we're still working on that. We're still looking to see how we can create that landscape. So imagine. Now, I'm going to walk you through some of the highlights of the guidelines. I'm not going to go through all the detail, but I'm going to tell you that most of the detail, like 99% of it's consistent with the work that FIRESafe Marin, Marin Master Gardeners, other folks are putting out there to the public. But I'm going to give you some of the highlights where we think we've added value. And that is, we've focused very heavily on native plants because they're for the birds and the bees and the butterflies, and a lot of humans like them too. They're adapted to our local climate, including summer drought. And now we have watering restrictions, so we're especially challenged, but native plants perform best in our area. I just want to also note that out of this process, the Marin chapter of the California Native Plant Society developed a list of replacement species for those that are deemed hazardous by local defensible space codes, like Mill Valley and Santa Fe have a list of plants that they'd like to see you remove them from your landscape. And so they have this list where there's native species that perform the same function as the trees that are on the so-called bad list. So if there's native trees, there's native shrubs, there's natives that could perform as a hedge, there's ground covers. So that's that sort of thing. And that came out of this discussion from all the participants. Another focus is carbon sequestration. And you know, the climate crisis that we're facing is driving our wildfire risk in a large measure. So I think this is something that we emphasized at and I think all of the fire service staff who are coming to your yard to do assessments will tell you, you don't have to lose your tree to be fire smart. Trees are the best at sequestering carbon, especially long-lived trees. So you can prune them up, you can get them off the chimney, they can stay. Similarly, native shrubs can perform well in your yard. They won't burn as well as they do in the wild if you maintain them. Maintenance means pruning them up, spacing them correctly, taking the dead wood out of them, and hydrating them. So they perform adequately in the environment in terms of fire behavior, and they also provide all the other values. And the last piece is choosing the right mulch to use. Adding carbon to your soil is a way to store carbon in the long term. And it also increases soil moisture, which is really key. So those are three bullets there for carbon sequestration that you can do in your yard. And finally, this is probably the where a lot of the greatest attention got focused in our ESP group, was kind of trying to figure out how we can get our backyards to be more quality wildlife habitat. So again, native plants are really the place to start, because the native invertebrates and birds, they thrive on the native plants best. And you're going to learn from our other speakers today that there's other measures you can take to protect wildlife, particularly nesting birds. So that's something there was a lot of attention focused on. And then you can add wildlife habitat structures and water sources to your backyard to make that a more productive wildlife habitat. And finally, there's the idea that you can, as we do this 1 yard at a time, we can stitch more vibrant habitat across our neighborhoods, across the landscape. And that's what we're calling pollinator corridors. So that's something some folks are working on, is how to measure that and how to map it as we transform our unmanaged landscapes into fire smart, biodiverse landscapes. So there's a lot of detail I'm skipping over. That'll, as I said, I'm going to right to the last bullet. The ESP recommendations were formed through the participation of environmental folks, but also the FIRESafe Marin staff, master gardeners, Native Plant Society, Marin Water, Xerces Society, who are the go-to folks for pollinators. So this was a long process, happened over 7 months. We were meeting monthly. There's a document that's coming that we all worked hard to find consensus, and I think we've done that really well. So really, the summary, I just want to say we have an opportunity to transform our yards, build more fire smart, biodiverse neighborhoods, and then connect them across the landscape to address our wildfire, our climate, and our biodiversity crisis. So how do we do that? I say native plants are our best bets, that they're not the only actors out there, and certainly we'll have all sorts of plants in our yard, but as far as these environmental benefits, I think native plants are the best. Maintenance, prune woody plants, so your yard could be a carbon sink, that we create biodiversity 1 yard at a time. That's all I have.
Great. Well, thank you, Mike. That was great. Really informative. And before we get on, I want to thank not just you, but all the people who contributed to making the recommendations that come out, environmentally sound practice, ecologically sound practices. There have been so many meetings, so much participation, and folks will be seeing it soon, but produced, I think, a really productive document that will serve as a good blueprint for going forward. And one of the things that made me happiest is I think it lines up so well with a lot of the messaging that's already there from the groups you talked about, whether it be FIRESafe Marin, much of the fire community, Marin master gardeners, native plants, etc. So we're really all on the same page going forward, and I think that's a real plus, and that's the way to get things done. One of the big things that comes up in our webinar series we're getting more focused in are myths. There's a lot of myths out there. And I know when it was first proposed that we create the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority, there was a lot of concern from environmentalists and others. And one of the concerns from the environmental community is, oh my gosh, $20 million a year, they're going to be clear cutting Marin. How far does $20 million, not that most of it is even spent on that, how far does it get us in Marin County?
Well, it's not enough to fully pay for all the work that needs to be done, but it's certainly good seed money and it's incentive to folks. I think before MWPA started, there was a kind of a groundswell of interest. So we've got a lot of work to do. This work's not going to happen overnight. 19 million acre is not all going to vegetation management. So it's really, it's going to be a generational change. So all of you here that are doing work in your yard, you're leading it as we go forward.
Yeah, I think the real point is that that's enough to do some really strategic initiatives, but by no means is it going to massively alter the landscape of Marin. Most of it is going to be intact. Much of Marin, we're very fortunate, is already committed, dedicated open space with very dedicated land managers out there who I think are going to continue to do a good job of making our environment healthy and be sensitive to environmental concerns there. That's kind of the Marin spirit that's there. One of the things I really liked was the picture that you showed of old Marin. I love the old Marin pictures. And what is so noticeable is how different it looks. It's typically grassland with the native oaks. And sometimes this is another myth. Well, if you do nothing, that's going to be natural. But I think maybe we passed that point a long time ago. What do you think, Mike?
Well, yeah, we've seen massive change in our vegetation. We started putting out fires successfully, and we've put houses on hillsides. We've planted like mad. We've transformed the whole landscape. So, and our houses are embedded in this. If you look at an aerial photo, the transition from wildlands to some neighborhoods, the only difference is you can see little squares down there. But so those days have changed, and there is significant risk.
Yeah, well, and as we talked about before, in those days, you did have low-level wildfire as a regular occurrence out there, keep the forest floor clean. We had the roving herds of elk and whatnot, and that all helped maintain that type of environment. And sadly, those days are not here right now. So we have to manage things a little bit differently. One of the things you brought up, and it's again of interest to me, in my inbox, probably 4 or 5 times a week, I hear from a resident and they say, I'm really concerned because there's this big tree out there and that tree is going to burn down my house. And that's really not how wildfire works. For those of you who've been following our webinar series, we talk a lot about this. What really drives the home destruction are embers, and you'll usually see homes burned right to the ground and the trees are in fact intact. We are anything but anti-tree, and maybe you can say a little bit more about the value of trees, not just for carbon, which I thought was really important, but just as part of the environment and something if they're maintained properly is really not the wildfire problem.
Well, yeah, they provide shade for us. They keep that summer sun from beating up your garden in many cases. It keeps it cool. We love trees just because of the aesthetics. We all resonate when looking at trees. So yeah, they're important for climate, but they aren't the fire risk. The fire risk, certainly embers drive things, but even the fire drive, traveling across the landscape, typically the low to moderate fires intensity, they're traveling on the ground vegetation, the ground fuels, not in the crowns of trees. So not the huge, I mean, there are individual trees that are a mess and need to be cleaned up, but certainly pruning from below and crown cleaning and that sort of thing addresses the fire risk.
Wonderful. Well, thanks, Mike. Well, you also talked about habitat, but I think we're going to get into habitat nesting in our next presentation. And I really do want to thank you, Mike, and all the great work once again that's being done by ESP out there. Thank you.
Thanks, Rich.
All right. So at this point, I'd like to introduce Nate Clark, Marin County Open Space District, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about habitat nesting and so forth. Nate?
Thank you, Rich. My name is Nate Clark. I'm the Biodiversity and Fields Management Coordinator for Marin County Parks and Open Space. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. I work with a group of people on our staff, and we handle a lot of the wildlife compliance that goes on with our projects in Marin County Parks and Open Space. And a big part of that environmental compliance is conducting nesting bird surveys prior to any vegetation removal work. And so a lot of times that takes the form of maintenance mowing behind our neighbors' homes, trail work, fire fuel reduction projects of woody vegetation, all of those kinds of projects beforehand we conduct these nesting bird surveys. And so I'm going to kind of walk you through our process a little bit, the mindset that we take, the reasons why we do this, but also recognizing that managing wildland is a little bit different than managing your own personal private yard. And so there are just a few minor adjustments, which we'll go over here. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. And let's be up and away. So as you can see here, there's going to be a lot of wonderful bird pictures in this presentation. If you love birds like me, it's a lot of fun to look at them and to consider them in both as individuals and as part of the greater environment. So I'm just going to talk very briefly about the purpose of these surveys. We're going to talk a little bit about the laws and the regulations that kind of govern these particular creatures and what we can and cannot do with them. We'll talk a little bit about our survey protocol, and then we'll talk a little bit about how do you actually get out there and you conduct a survey. Let's get into it. So purposes of our surveys, they're sort of twofold. Absolutely, number one, first and foremost, we want to protect the natural resources prior to any project implementation, simply because we think they are valuable. We think that native bird species, native animal species, and plant species, the natural landscape is something to be treasured, and we do treasure that at Marin County Parks. It's part of our sort of our guiding statements, both preservation and recreation. And so we protect them because we think they are valuable. It's also kind of important to remember that when we're doing work to protect our own homes, we want to make sure that we're not damaging the homes of birds in their nests. And that can range from any point in the nesting experience process, whether they're just starting to lay twigs on a branch, all the way up to when the fledglings are preparing to leave the nest. We want to protect that breeding process. We also do it because there are, like I said, environmental laws surrounding these. And so we want to, in order to steward these resources, we need to comply with the existing environmental laws that protect them. There's actually quite a few laws that protect nests and our birds, especially in the state of California. The big one that I'm going to talk about, I can't get into all of them, otherwise we'd be here until 10 o'clock at night. But the big one that kind of governs a lot of our actions, it's the Migratory Bird Treaty Act of 1918. It's a federal act, and it prohibits pursuing, hunting, taking, capturing, killing, attempting to take, so if you miss, that still counts, capturing or killing for the protection of migratory birds and or any part, nest, or egg of such birds. So it's pretty inclusive. Whoever penned it did a very good job. And it's essentially there. It's set up to prevent poaching of birds and to protect them from humans from harming nests. It's one of many, like I said. There's also the Federal Endangered Species, California. There's a Bald and Golden Eagle Act, which we won't get into there, but needless to say, birds are very well protected in our country and in our state as well. So the absolute best way to protect them is to sort of adhere to these general avoidance measures. Most birds do not nest all year round. There is a season of when their peak nesting is, and there's a little bit of play on each side, and of course seasonality can dictate that. Like this year, for example, we're seeing a lot of birds finish their nesting early, but generally speaking, this is sort of a good guideline of when birds are nesting. And so raptors, that's hawks, falcons, eagles, owls, they'll go from usually about beginning of January through July. Songbirds, so that's jays, sparrows, finches, they'll go about through March through July. The northern spotted owl, which is a federally endangered species that we have in our county and a lot on our Marin County open space land. We observe their nesting season from February through July. Ridgeways, rails, which nest in marsh and wetlands habitats, similar, they go through August. And so the best way to protect them is to avoid doing any work in this time. And when I say work, I mainly mean motorized removal of any vegetation. So weed whip mowing, chainsawing, etc., because the biggest impacts can be noise impacts, which can ultimately cause a nest to fail if they are violent enough and loud enough and close enough. So we always say avoidance is sort of the best measure. However, we also acknowledge that that's not always a possibility. Some of these dates are actually, especially kind of in late spring and early summer, is when people really start thinking about doing some yard maintenance, really start thinking about fire season approaching and want to prepare for that. So luckily, there is a way to sort of make sure we're protecting nests, but also being able to do the work when we need to do the work. And that's where the nesting bird survey comes in. It's another layer of mitigation. If we can't avoid, we can also survey, and that can be acceptable mitigation as well. So this is just a little chart that we have. It's kind of a timing of the breeding season for birds in the North Bay region. It was put together by the Point Raised Bird Observatory, which is now called Point Blue. As you can see, a lot of the egg laying kind of starts to pick up in March and April, and then the young kind of flushes after this in this sort of second histogram here. And typically by about July, things have mostly tapered off in most species. Now, there are examples of birds nesting all year round, but for the majority of species, it's kind of this big flush that starts in February and then goes up and it kind of tapers off by the end of July. And so typically by August 1st, we kind of consider that to be the sort of soft close of nesting bird season. And our own policy for parks is that once August 1st hits, we're able to do work without conducting bird surveys ahead of time. We consider that to be now in the avoidance season. So kind of a general workflow, and I've adapted this a little bit to private yards. But first and foremost is you want to identify what vegetation you want to cut. Like Mike was talking about before, we don't necessarily advocate for cutting down all trees, and maybe it's just a certain hedge where you're removing juniper, or you want to kind of push back some of the lower branches on the ground. So first identify the project area, the vegetation, and then figure out when you want to do it. I think a lot of folks probably aren't thinking super far ahead, though I do know some examples of people who do. So figure out when you want to do it, whether it's this coming weekend, in a month, etc. And then within 7 days of that date, so say it is next Saturday, okay, well, the previous Sunday, get out there in your yard or wherever and just take a look around. We'll go through some survey protocols and tips a little bit later on, but that's when you want to conduct it, is within a week, no later than, or no, earlier than 7 days, to give the chance for birds to sort of build their nests and whatnot. If we go any earlier, say we go a month earlier, well, that's actually quite a bit of time on a bird's timetable. And so there's a pretty good chance that a nest could have been built since that survey started. So there's kind of two possible ends to that survey. You can either find a nest or you don't. Find a nest, there's kind of two more options. There's emergency work. So for example, a tree fell down onto your house, or there was some kind of big emergency that had happened and there's a nest really nearby. Well, that might you might kind of think of that as emergency work, and the work might need to proceed anyway. But I would say for a lot of, pretty much all of this preparation for hardening our landscapes against fire, that would not be considered emergency work. And so if you can find the nest, create a buffer around it. We typically recommend maybe 50 feet or so, and just watch it. Watch the nest, monitor it, see what stage it's in. If it's being built, you might have to wait a little bit of time, maybe up to a month or a month and a half. If it already has young in it, then you don't have long to wait at all. And you wait and you watch until the nestlings fledge. And then once they've left the nest, the site is cleared and your work can proceed. It's just as easy as that. When you do conduct a survey, like I said, you survey a maximum of 7 days before the initiation of vegetation maintenance, 7 days or less, to make sure that you're really taking that snapshot of what's going on in your yard as close as you can to when we're hanging it from this, but no later than about 11 a.m. And even now, that's kind of pushing it as it's getting really hot. Once it's hot, the temperature activity dies right down. It's actually quite hard to find birds later on in the morning and into the afternoon. And so if you're really vigilant and really going to go get after it, we recommend just getting up at 6:30, 7 a.m. in the yard and just watching and seeing what's out there. We do not recommend conducting surveys in the rain. It's kind of like the heat. Birds tend to hunker down. It's hard to find them. Same with wind and fog. Basically, a lot of inclement weather conditions can be levels, as they do for us, right? We don't really want to stand out in the rain. I do know some people who would, but for the majority of species, that's inclement conditions. And try to finish your work within 7 days of that survey, so it's still good. Otherwise, you can just resurvey. So actually getting out and surveying, we recommend two different types of techniques. We have something called active flushing and active observation. So active flushing is a really good fit if you want to mow swaths of grass or herbaceous vegetation. And what you do is you grab a yardstick. We'll use just lengths of meter-long PVC pipe. And you walk slowly through the grass, making sure you're not stepping on anything. And you just very slowly kind of sweep the stick back and forth, at least sort of 6 inches up off the ground, kind of rustle the vegetation, and just see if anything flushes. If you do have a flush of birds, they kind of startle and fly off. Be very careful and kind of see if you can find where they came from. Chances are there might be a nest there. For active observation, we recommend this for sites where you're doing kind of shrubs or tree maintenance, woody vegetation removal. And this is a lot less, this is more about watching and listening. So we recommend just kind of walking through the project footprint, listening for birds, looking for birds, and really being out there for a prolonged period of time. If you can be up there for an hour, the longer the better. You get a better snapshot of what's going on. So actually looking for birds, look for very slight movements, look for out of the corner of your eye, rustling and moving around. You have to be very still and quiet. Is very, it's kind of a meditative activity. It's quite fun to be out early in the morning and to practice being still and quiet. Make sure you walk through the entire area that you're going to be working in and move around. Make sure you get different viewing perspectives so you're not just looking out your living room window and thinking that's enough. And actually get out there and see if you can spend maybe 10, 15 minutes in a few different spots. And above all, listen for birds, because birds will oftentimes broadcast their location through their songs. Things to be looking out for, alarm calls. So if you hear, as you're slowly walking around, if you hear a bird call getting quicker and a lot harsher and repeated incessantly, that's something called an alarm call, which is usually a good indication that one bird is trying to warn others or trying to warn you to step away from a protected patch of your yard, which could be a nest. If you see them carrying nesting materials, sticks, feathers, leaves, string, watch where they go. Because they will lead you right to where their nest is. Sometimes they'll kind of move around in the landscape, so keep an eye on them. Sometimes they'll leave your yard because they're nesting somewhere else. But as long as you can keep an eye out for them, watch them and follow them. If they keep returning to the same location, every 30 seconds to a few minutes, they kind of go to the same branch and they flush. They go to the same branch and they flush. That might be a pretty good clue that there's a nest there. Carrying food as opposed to just sort of catching a fly and then eating it. If they kind of hold it in their beak and then move somewhere, that's a good indication that it might lead to a nest. And then guarding, if you kind of get over there and they're not leaving their spot, and again, not asking you to get super close and to disturb or to harm them. But if they're not really leaving like they maybe would, they're not giving up their ground easily. Again, could be a nest. So kind of a combination of all these things can really clue you into where the birds are nesting on the landscape. And it's also really helpful to learn some basic bird ID. I highly recommend it. It's a lot of fun if you don't already know your basic backyard birds. There's lots of resources. Learn a couple birds at a time. See what birds tend to come into your backyard the most and start with them. Learn common birds from Marin. There's, again, quite a few resources, and make sure you're paying attention to colors, to movement, to size, and to their song and their vocalizations. And write them all down, even if it's just a description. Brown bird with white stripe on head, black bird that is shiny with a yellow beak, and then you can go back and reference. The other kind of special nest that we tell people to look out for is raptor nests. They are typically a lot larger. They're easier to locate. They're typically higher up in a tree, Monterey pine, redwood, maybe at the top of an oak. They can be confused with squirrel nests. So I highly encourage you to kind of maybe Google and check out the differences. Just a couple of little things. Raptors will be high up in a tree. They'll be on sturdy branches. Their nest shape will usually be a dish, wide and somewhat concave, and it'll be mostly sticks and other materials. Squirrels tend to be kind of all over the place, and it just looks like a big bag of leaves hanging out of the tree. It's a lot less structured than a hawk nest will. And a dusky-footed wood rat tends to really stick closer to the ground, maybe a little bit up off the ground, but their piles will look a little bit more like a dome pile of sticks. Raptors do reuse their nests. So if you know there's a raptor nest in your yard or nearby, watch it. And there's a good chance that it might be occupied again. If it's not occupied this year, it may not happen every year, but they also may not fall apart on occupied years. And so they could come back. And again, keep a watch out on the nest. Sometimes the nest doesn't look like it's occupied, and then suddenly a mom will come in, mama hawk will come in with a big old rat hanging out of her mouth. And it's a pretty good indication there. And you can also look for downy feathers poking out of the nest, and then below the nest, sometimes there's whitewash or bits of animal remains. So like I said, there's a lot of good external resources to learn about birds, learn more about birds and nesting behavior especially. This is Sibley Guide to Birds, which is really great. We have lots of apps these days on your phone. The Audubon one is one of the ones I use. I love it. A lot of people use the Merlin Bird ID app, which kind of walks you through steps of like the size, the color, the location, and that can be really helpful to narrowing down your list. And then of course, there's lots of websites. So really quickly before I end, I just want to walk through some of the maybe common nests that you might see in your yard. Some nests kind of look like a cup. So like a hummingbird nest, which will be very, very small, almost like a teacup size or smaller. There's a cedar waxwing, juncos, flycatchers. They'll kind of form this bowl, this cup shape. There's also kind of stick nests. We talked about the hawk, but also crows will form kind of sticky nests too. Scrub jays. If you can find a scrub jay nest, congratulations. They're incredibly hard to find. Mockingbirds as well will build kind of smaller versions of those. A lot of birds nest in cavities. So out in the open space, if we find a big old dead snag, chances are that's really good habitat for birds. And so a lot of woodpecker species, like the northern flicker, will use them. Swallow species, even barn owls and wrens, European starlings, which is an invasive bird, they will use those cavities as well. So if you see a hole in the tree, keep an eye out. A lot of birds will nest on the ground too, and that's where that active flushing really comes in handy. Sweeping your stick above the ground to kind of create some movement and see if something flushes. Again, be very careful with that technique so you're not trampling or injuring birds. And then, bird nests come in actually a lot of kind of miscellaneous and different shapes. And so like the bush tit will form this sort of gym sock looking thing, which is always, it kind of looks like almost a wasp's nest hanging out of the tree. Turkey vultures will just plop straight into a snag. This is actually a nest that's on our land right now that we're monitoring. This picture's from last year, but we visited this year, and you can see this tiny little puffball here. That's the baby turkey vulture. It is active again this year, which is really exciting. And then some swallows will build, like the cliff swallow, barn swallow will kind of build out using kind of debris and bits of mud and such kind of on existing human structures too. So keep an eye out for those as well. So just a couple really quick takeaways before I end tonight. Check the area, whatever area you're going to be working in, for bird activity a few days before vegetation removal. Avoid working within 50 feet of any active nests, and that could be weeks or months, but just keep watching it until it fledges, and then ensure that the nest is fledged before continuing with the vegetation removal. Wonderful.
All right, Nate, wonderful. Thanks very much. I really enjoyed that. You know, I heard you speak before, and each time I hear you, I learn so much more. It's very fascinating. And it's very encouraging, because the way you present things, I think it gives homeowners a sense that they actually can get out there and make a difference and do some of these things, which is real positive. Some of the questions that come in, I think you sort of answered, but I'll just go over them. One person was asking about hummingbirds in particular. Something, maybe a little bit more of a sense of what to watch for with them in determining their nests.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, hummingbirds they look very cute and docile, but they're one of the most aggressive birds on the landscape. And so, you know, it might be a Napoleon complex or something, but I have been dive bombed, attacked, swarmed by mama hummingbirds who are looking to protect their nest. And so we kind of joke that hummingbird nests are actually some of the easier ones to find because they're so small, but hummingbirds are so active. And so I would say for a hummingbird nest, look for the female who's a little bit more drab colored, and look for her moving around to the air, repeating repetition and returning to one spot. She might attack you, which is always an interesting experience, but it's a really good indication that there could be a nest. Something to watch out for hummingbirds, though, is if you see the male, especially with the Anna's hummingbird, you see the Anna's hummingbird male, which has the beautiful sort of reddish, purplish plumage on the head and the neck, and the green as well. They have no association with, once they sort of help the mom create the eggs, they are out. We call them the deadbeat dads of the bird world. And so if you see one buzzing around, it's not going to be anywhere near a nest. And so look out for the females, which have the more drab colors.
Great, thank you. Another question, I guess there's a chat going on Next Door Neighbor, what a surprise, about the benefits and risks of filling bird baths during the drought. You have any thoughts on bird baths, the drought, and all that?
Yeah, I don't really know the details of the harm of it. Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have much. We don't really do a lot of work in yards. We mostly do it on the natural landscape, and so we encounter very few bird baths in the open space.
Good enough. All right, so we'll stay tuned to that discussion that's going on out there. So the survey techniques do cover kind of it's a long period of time, but the obvious time of the year that's out there. Is there anything that you might use outside of bird season in terms of a technique that would make any sense?
I would say, yeah, all those techniques are very much applicable outside of bird nesting season as well. I mean, like I said before, there are some species that will nest all year, or we've found nests throughout the year. Hummingbird is another example that they'll pretty much nest when they can. The mourning dove is another one. And so I would say, yeah, always be watching, always be listening to what's going on in your yard. And again, it's all about patience. It's all about taking your time and just being very sort of just observing what's going on. And I would highly recommend people who are looking to get into birding to practice bird songs, because that will clue you in more so than visual, because birds are very good at hiding, but they will often vocalize. And so, and they'll sing all year long. And depending on the season, you might get new visitors coming in who maybe don't breed in Marin, but who visit Marin. Yellow crowned sparrow is a good example of that. So
great. There is one question which is a repetition about the apps that are out there. I think I'll leave that for you. Maybe you can just type in the answer so that they remember the names of Audubon, and I think it was the Merlin. I did want to make one last thing before we leave that we just barely touched on. So obviously, if you do find a nest, you don't want to disturb it. You want to be sensitive to it and whatnot. But I think one of the things that you talked about that I think is very important for homeowners is the use of power tools that make a lot of noise versus some activity maybe away from the nest where you're using hand tools and you're being a little more discreet about what you're doing.
Absolutely, yeah. So those buffers that we talked about really only apply to power tools because of the noise that they generate. But if you're using hand tools, that buffer shrinks down considerably. And so we would just recommend, if you have just a regular handsaw, a pair of loppers, a saw on a pole or something like that, you can pretty much do the work a lot closer to the nest. I think I would definitely recommend, if you know the location of the nest, giving it somewhat of a berth. I wouldn't do any sort of branch trimming on a branch that is currently housing a nest, but the bush next to it, or maybe a lower down branch that is not going to shake the tree or something like that, then that can be acceptable because the noise impact is so minimal. But again, while you're doing the work, keep an eye out for the activity of the adults, and if they are stressed, if they really don't like that you're there, if they are hopping around and scolding you, I'd encourage you, maybe back off for the time being. But yes, with hand tools, you can get actually a lot closer than power tools.
Great. Well, thanks, Nate. That was we could probably go on all night about this because it's quite an interesting topic, but I do want to thank you very much for making the time.
Absolutely.
So with that said, we're going to move on to our next presenter, who's Yvette Blount from the Novato Fire Department, who's in charge of the home assessment program up there. And she'll tell you a bit about how that works and the fact that our wildfire mitigation specialists that are out there assessing homes are sensitive to environmental concerns like everybody in Marin is. Yvette?
Okay, so I guess I don't have any slides to show, but what I'm going to talk about is wildfire mitigation specialists that I have here in Novato, and they have different, at different parts of the county have different type of programs going, but I'm going to talk about mine. So we have 5 full-time specialists that go and give home assessments, and we help people understand how to have and improve their environment around their home, a home hardening, and their vegetation management. So with that, this topic is about our environmental concerns. And so I've been asked questions of, do we consider that? And yes, and I think I know Rich loves to talk about myths. Some of the big myths that we have is that a good defensible space means it's a moonscape with no trees and bare mineral soil. And that's the myth. That is not true. What we really try to educate all of our residents is that you can find a balance of improving. We really promote zone 0, which is the first 5 feet in your home. So that's where we would prefer to have non-combustibles. But then working out from your property, out from 5 feet to 100 feet and beyond, things change. So we work on spacing, we work on horizontal and vertical separation, we work on health of the trees. We try to get people to pull out those hazardous vegetations that were talked about earlier with Mike. Yes, we would prefer the juniper to be taken out, the Scotch brooms, French brooms, all the pampas grasses, things of those natures that, with Italian cypress, all those things that are very high in oils. They produce a lot of embers. They look very green on the outside. They're dead on the inside. And although they are drought tolerant, they are very hot. They light easily, and they can cause a lot of problems with your defensible space. What we ask is that you can replace them with native plants. That is a wonderful suggestion that we across the board recommend to everybody who has trying to improve their defensible space and making it a fire smart garden. So we, right plant for the right place. A big concern is mulches. Now, mulch is really important for a healthy garden and healthy soil and healthy plants. And for all the environment, for the birds and the bees and all of those things as well, and the carbon imprint. But we really try to educate that where and which type you put and where you put it is really important. So in your first 5 feet, we ask for no mulch there. We would prefer gravel. We would prefer decomposed granite, DG, things like that. And then as you farther you get out, we would want you to use larger diameter barks instead of the gorilla bark. Gorilla bark and the shredded bark is what we actually don't want you to use. It has been proven to be healthy for the soil, but for a fire smart garden, we ask for that to be way farther out in the garden if you're going to use it, but we would prefer natural barks that are larger in diameter, so you can have the same effect for your plantings. So right plant, right place, healthy, proper separation vertically, horizontally, making sure you're around your house in the first 5 feet is your tightest, is your cleanest, it has good housekeeping. And then once you're out and you have your trees and things like we will not ask you to take out your trees. We may say you need to limb them up or cut them back from the roof. But as Nate said, it's important before you schedule any work to go around and do your own personal survey. He works mainly out in the open space, but that it's important that you take a good look at your property and you make some good sound choices to improve your defensible space. We want you to plant things that encourage the birds and the bees and the butterflies and all of those, because that's going to just improve our environment. And we want you to have healthy green plantings and trees and use less water. So it's this very fine balance. And so our mitigation specialists are all trained to understand and educate all the residents with these topics. And we use all the resources of all the professionals that are talking here today. So we have a resource center on our webpage at novatofire.org, but you can also go to FIRESafe Marin, but we promote Master Gardeners, the Native Plant Society, the Audubon Society. All of those are on our website. If you see something on our website that's not there, when you go and look at it, send me a message and we'll put it on there. We promote people to go to the Marin Wildfire Society or out of San Rafael, including Birds Unlimited and Vintage Oaks. We have they have a great website with a lot of information about the birds. And here's a personal story that I had happen today across my office. We offer vegetation management grants and home hardening grants up here in Novato. And one of them came across for some tree work. They were limbing up some trees and pulling it back from the roof lines and having some separation across their whole property. And one of the oak trees had a bird nest in it. So the invoice that came in for the work and the payment was completely different because they needed to wait on one of the oak trees. One of the oak trees had a bird nest in it. The other trees were on the other side of the property. So they're holding off on that tree until November, when the birds have, moved on and finished their cycle. So that was really wonderful to see that their professional tree service worked with them and that they were conscious of that. So like I say, we are trained on it, but we send them to the professionals. It's just really important to consider when you're doing your work and what time of the year is the best. I think one of the greatest thing about having an assessment is you get a roadmap, and that roadmap gives you some things you can do right away, some things that are maybe down the line a little bit more costly that you can work towards, but that you'll have a plan and just keep picking at it. And the MWPA is here for 10 years, so and hopefully beyond that, but for the next 10 years, this is what we're going to be promoting. And you can do a lot of great work and improve our environment and help all of our birds and bees and critters and the insects and all of it by working and developing your landscape to be fire adaptive, to have both. You can have a beautiful yard and fire safe home and just have a few changes, and then just make sure you're doing them at the right time. So that's my spiel. I think that it's important to consider all aspects when you're improving your landscape.
Wonderful. Thanks, Yvette. That's great. And, you know, one of the myths that I think is out there, we're the myth busting thing, is that, oh my goodness, when they come out to check on my property, inspect my property, assess my property, they're going to make me get rid of all this stuff. They're going to force me to do things. Is that the philosophy that you have?
That is not the philosophy. So this is completely educationally based. It's non-compliance. And for us, we offer grant money up here in Novato. And the one component is that you have to have an assessment that's educationally based. And then we will help you make good choices. And if you do some of the work, we will match a lot of your dollars for those projects. The most important thing is for every resident across Marin County to take a good hard look at their landscape and really understand how fire is going to affect them if it does happen. And the time to be doing the work is now, not when there's smoke in the air or on red flag day. It's to have a plan before, to have your to-go bags, to know your evacuation route, to know that you can get out of your driveway, that you've cleared enough that a fire engine can come into your driveway. A defensible space is so when you leave, if a fire department comes to protect it, that it's defendable, that that's safe enough for them to be there to help save your property, and that it has a good fighting chance. But the work really needs to come from each one of those residents. And so, you know, we don't go in there and make everybody pull everything out. We're going to give you suggestions, and we're going to tell you a priority of which we think starting is the best place to start. And we're here, for phone calls, emails, questions. If you're going to have a concern or something changes, and it's not a one and done. I call it the wash, rinse, spin, repeat, because we're here every year. We want you to have assessment every year. And if you have done some improvements and you want to know if there needs to be more done, we're available.
Great. There's kind of a tricky question that came from the audience about a tree next to a home. I think I'm going to put it in two parts. The first one, what is the code requirement for how close a tree can be to the roof line? And then the second one is, what if pruning the tree to that level weakens or damages or harms the tree? So it's kind of an in-betweener.
Right. So I'm not an arborist. And so I can tell you that it's important, if a tree is close to the home, that you are 10 feet away from your chimney and that you're pulled up away from your roof is the best you can. And so an arborist can tell you if your tree is healthy or if it's unhealthy. I know that, codes have changed over the years, and a lot of the homes and the residents in Marin County have been here, before that was put into place. So we need to make good choices. Some of them are heritage trees. It depends if you're in the city and the county, and you need to look at what it is for you and the rules are for that. We will give you suggestions on how to improve the fire safety, but if there's questions with that, then you need to go and ask your arborists. You need to look at the codes for where you live and figure out what the rules are for you. We would prefer not to have any trees in zone 0. The first 5 feet, we call that the non-combustible zone, but that's not always, going to happen. So if you can get some horizontal from the structure and some vertical from the roof line without damaging the tree, that's what we suggest. But most importantly, then you need to keep your roof clean, keep your gutters clean, and continually do that. One of the biggest things that we come across is that people clean their gutters for the winter storm, so they can have drainage off their roof line. But in the wildfire situation, it's having packed gutters or debris on your roof during a fire season is very dangerous. Most homes burn down because of ember storms, and a large percentage burn from the roof down.
Wonderful. Good advice there, Beth. Thank you very much. Just before we move on to the roundtable, I think one kind of nice thing that we've seen, you start with Mike representing the concerns that have come out of the Ecologically Sound Practice Environmental Group, and how they line up with FireSafe Marin, the work we're doing. Nate's with the land management, open and large spaces, but we're all on the same page. And once again, we hear from you from the fire service out there doing the actual assessments, but I hope all the audience is hearing the extent to which we're literally all on the same page, all working together. And you can have both an ecologically, I'll put it a little bit differently, that you can be very environmentally sensitive and still make very significant improvements to the fire safety of your home. They're not mutually exclusive by any means. Your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. You said it fantastically. There has to be a balance. We are learning to be a fire adapted community. We don't have a wildfire problem. We have a home ignition problem. And so, right, Rich?
Oh, my
so
favorite thing. That's my deal. All right, great.
It is. We have plenty of homes that burn down, and the trees that are standing right next to the homes are perfectly green with a little singe from the radiant heat from the house that burned down. The trees are not starting the homes on fire. The debris in the first 5 feet and the products that the home are made of, the gaps, the vents, the windows, full gutters, these are the things that are burning homes down. With new codes changing in 2008, we've seen that even with the homes that have been made with the proper WUI compliant code materials have been lost, because then we add in our landscaping choices, and we put vines on arbors connected to the house, and we put bark up against the house, and we add these things that we think are beautiful in the wrong place. So right place, right plant, farther out, improve your 5 feet and enjoy the environment, and let it thrive. Let it have what it needs to have in the appropriate place.
Well, let's all of us hold those thoughts, because those are just great. And let's bring back Nate and Mike, and we can talk just a little bit more about that, because it is a very interesting topic, I think. So as Nate and Mike return, join Yvette and myself, I think one of the words we hadn't used earlier tonight is fire adapted. So we used to call it a fire safe room. We used to call it living with fire. Fact is, wildfires are natural. There have always been wildfires. There's always going to be wildfires. We made a comparison. If you move up to Lake Tahoe, you better be prepared to adapt to the snow. If you're going to live down here, you need to be able to adapt to living with wildfire. And so when we talk about doing that, means we want to be safe. We want to protect our homes. We want to do all this in a good way. So what does being fire adapted mean to you, Mike?
As a homeowner?
As in general, homeowner, ESP, you have many hats. You can pick one.
Fire adapted. Well, I'm with you guys. My whole career has been managing wildlands, and we did work to help adapt the certain kinds of forest lands so they stand up in advance of a wildfire. But I'm with you that the things you need to do is first take care of your family and know how to, what to take with you when you get away when you have to go. And the next is, keep your house from igniting. That's the most adaptable. I mean, it's really not an ecological question. The vegetation in your yard has an impact, and that's where ESP really focused. Just how your land is managed, and that has a lot of value in terms of ecosystems. But those actions you can do can be completely compatible with fire safety.
Yeah. So Yvette, do you think we can take actions that really will protect? Is it going to make a difference? It's like, oh my gosh, these wildfires, they're too much. I give up.
It 100% will make a difference. Littlest things can make the biggest difference. And I think that just starting is what needs to happen, because once you get a little education and you understand, then you're like, okay, I'm gonna have my patio set 15 feet away from my house instead of everything piled up against my home where, everything collects. My favorite thing I tell people is, it's been very windy lately in Marin County. In the morning when it's quiet, we're now going to do Nate's program and my program. You're going to take your cup of coffee and you're gonna walk all the way around your front yard and your backyard, and you're gonna turn around and look at your house. You're gonna look at your house, and you're gonna see where all the little things are, the little leaves, all the stuff that's collecting, and you're gonna see where embers can catch. And then you're gonna develop a plan to clean it up. And then you're gonna turn around and look at Nate's trees, and you're gonna see if there's any birds or things in there. And if you need to do some tree work and there's a nest, you're gonna wait. If not, start a little at a time. Use your green cans, talk to your neighbors. If somebody's not using their extra green can, ask them if you can fill it up. There's things that you can be doing, and you just need to work from the home and work your way out.
Great, good advice. So Nate, unfairly, sometimes our large land management agencies like open space get labeled as the source of the problem. If those guys had just cut down all the trees, I'd have nothing to worry about. But in fact, you guys are very active in maintaining these valuable spaces. You want to tell us a little bit about how you approach that?
Yeah, definitely. So we open space, all our parcels back up to over 3,000 neighbors. And so we have a lot of fence line that we have to manage. And so we spend a lot of time. In fact, that's one of our biggest efforts all year is maintaining the defensible space of our neighbors. And so we have a mowing program. We have a grazing program in some of our preserves. And then we do lots of targeted treatments in some of the woody areas that could really benefit from sort of these fire hardening activities that we've been talking about today. And so we do that all across our preserves. We manage a lot of land and a lot of acreage and a lot of fence line, and it's definitely a huge push every year to do it all. But it's part of being a good neighbor, and it's part of giving back to the community of Marin.
And part of the way they do it, at least in my community, is kind of exciting. They bring in goats. Grazing is one of the things they do out there.
Mm-hmm.
I think it does a great job, very popular, but a lot of times they'll bring out hand crews and do things. There's a lot of work that goes on out there, and it's sometimes it's underappreciated, and it is very important, and it's all very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say that one of the things that we hear and we're most concerned about here at FIRESafe Marin are what are the barriers to getting people to take action? We put out these webinars, we have the websites, we go out there, we have the Wildfire Mitigation Specialists, they work with the homeowners, they do assessments. But what's the biggest barriers? I'll start with you, Yvette.
Well, there's a few. One is they very much feel like we're going to come in and tell people what we're going to do. They want to be private. We're telling people to be neighborly, talk to their neighbors. I know COVID's given us a pause, but we're trying to get people to reach back out into the community, and they're thinking it's more power over and compliance based, and we're going to tell them what they want to do. And that's not what it's about. We're there to give them information on a parallel level, and then give them the power within to make changes so that they can sleep better at night, knowing that they've done everything to be prepared in case there is an event. So that is probably one of the biggest things. Another thing is they think that we are giving information to insurance companies, and that we are in conjunction with them, which we have nothing to do with them. This is strictly for improving each parcel for the benefit of you, for nobody else. This is private. It doesn't go to anybody else. We don't have any relationships with any of those and companies. And so that's a big worry. And then also, they were very nervous this past year with COVID. They thought that we might be coming in their home or getting too close. We've always used the precautions that we, are abiding by the state. And so there's a lot of nervousness around it. So once we're starting to happen, it's like our slow rolls picking up. That we always say, here's our card. Here's 5 more cards. Tell your neighbors. And once people realize that, oh my gosh, I got so much information out of it. This was great. Now I feel so much better. I have a place to start. We give pictures of your entire property so you can show it to your arborist or your gardener or your handyman. And it's just a great document that if you forget, our information's all on there. The websites are on there. We talk about Marin Alert, Nixle, evacuation routes, to-go kits. I mean, we pretty much touch on the entire topic and tell you where to go if you forget.
Okay, you do have to start. That's the first
You
thing.
have to
First step.
start.
Yeah.
Have to start.
So you'll see in our future webinars, you're going to see a lot more of an emphasis on our part about what are the simplest things you can do to get started that are not expensive, that you can literally walk out the door the next day and get going on. But one group that is not hesitating to get started is Marin County Open Space District. And so there's a question about some of the things you actually do because you're actually out there doing the things you need to. So when do you typically do the mowing?
Yeah, we do mowing for months and a long time. We typically start in April. If there's little bits here and there, we might even start as early as March, but we'll typically start kind of mid-April and work all the way through June, July, sometimes even into August if we need to in certain spots. It's tricky with the non-native annual grasses that dominate the hillsides of Marin. You have to hit them. You can't hit them too early because if you mow, in the wintertime, they'll just come right back up and it's a wasted effort. But if you wait too long and mow too late, then we really start running into a lot of those red flag days where we really shouldn't be using power tools and operating in those kind of environments. And so we typically start about April and we'll go pretty much into July for the bulk of it. And then sometimes special projects even into August and maybe September. So I would definitely recommend as stuff starts really kind of crisping up, that would be the time to hit it.
Great. So Nate, I also, as kind of a follow-up, this is again, a follow-up to a question from the audience. You guys have a great website. I haven't looked at it lately, but on it, does it describe some of your ecological principles and practices and so forth? That if somebody was somewhere else, they would say, how did those guys go about this? And it's there for them?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. It's actually, there's a document that we base all of our decisions off of, or a lot of our decisions off of, for not only fire fuel reduction work and mowing and defensible space, but also invasive species management and all of our vegetation decisions. It's our vegetation and biodiversity management plan. And you can actually find that on our website. It's a sizable PDF and it kind of describes our guiding principles and how we go about managing the vegetation concerns and needs that we have to, both as for fire fuel reduction, but also for ecological integrity. And we put a lot of effort into stewarding our preserves and pulling invasive species, broom, yellow star thistle, acacia treatments in areas that are not necessarily high target areas for fuel reduction, but we hit them because we're committed to removing invasive species from our landscape. So again, that document is called the Vegetation and Biodiversity Management Plan. And if you Google that and Marin County Parks and Open Space, you'll be able to find it on our website.
Great. Mike, you worked for many years for the Marin Municipal Water District, land management, another huge landowner manager in the country. Do they also have that kind of information on their website about what they're doing and so forth?
Yeah, all of the vegetation management activities on the watershed lands are governed by their Biodiversity, Fire and Fuels Integrated Plan and EIR. So yeah, it's there's a lot of meat there and a lot of guidance from the EIR on how to protect the environment. The water district manages about 1,000 acres of fuel breaks that are specifically for wildfire protection, but it also does land management across the entire landscape, dealing with fire issues also.
Well, I think we're very lucky in Marin County to have folks like yourselves out here really on top of things. Want to thank the audience tonight. Great questions. Thank you for sticking with us. If you have follow-up, you can always get a hold of us, FIRESafe Marin, or now you see Mike, Nate, and Yvette. I'm sure you can follow up with them too, although they're busy, but nonetheless. And we do hope you will join us for next month's webinar, which should get a pretty big draw because it's all about pets. Everything from horses and cows down to cats and dogs and all the more exotic things that people have. And what do we do with them when we have an evacuation or a wildfire or whatnot, how they all get taken care of. It should be very exciting. So I look forward to seeing you all next month. And again, I want to thank our guests tonight. Fantastic job. Really appreciate it. And we will see you all in a month. Take care now.
Thanks, Rich.